Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. Happy Sunday. I hope everybody's had a great weekend. Let me do this real quick. Where's the buttons? I haven't been in here in a while. Who's got the buttons? Oh, there we go. Let me get some things set up over here. On this one, let's open up the chat. Okay. I hope everybody's had a great weekend. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Northern California, is what we're going to say. The reason why is because we're also broadcasting on TikTok. I cannot identify where I'm at exactly. Anyway, if you do think you have a paranormal need, please let us know. You can find us on just about every social media. You can even Google us at the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team for help, and we will get to you. It might take us a day or two to get to you because, we'll call you back right away. But as far as going out to cover your case, because California is a huge state, and so it may take us a while. As you can tell, I'm in my glasses. I've been having, for the last Tuesday, I've been having trouble with my right eye. So I'm giving my eye a break, see if we can figure out what's going on with it. Welcome everybody on TikTok. Welcome everybody everywhere else. Again, I cannot see your comments or your names. However, I should have a moderator or two in there, and if you do comment, they'll go ahead and answer for you, or answer for me. And I do have a goal of 8 popcorn and movie buckets. If you could help me out with that, that would be wonderful. So what we're going to do today, this is Sunday. We haven't done this in a while. I'm going to be reading from a paranormal themed book. Sometimes they're true stories, sometimes they're not. In this case, these are all based on true stories. The author of this book is a PhD, and this book was written around early 1900. And she had gone ahead and searched the classic ghost stories, and did her research to compare them to actual ghost stories. And so that's what she pulled to make this book. I'm not doing psychic readings tonight, just to let you know. This is my night off from psychic readings. Anyway, so I will read for about an hour. We're starting the chapter, well, I'm going to say book 2, because these are small, these are short stories, short ghost stories. So we're starting book 2, and it's called The Shadows on the Wall by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. So it's The Shadows on the Wall by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. And so we'll be reading today. So do me a favor, like, follow, and share. That's all I ask over there on TikTok. See how many likes we can get tonight. And if you feel like gifting, that's fine. If not, that's fine too. Like I said, like, follow, and share. But I hope you enjoy the ghost stories, and curl up on your couches or wherever you may be sitting. Turn the lights down, and let's read some ghost stories. Let's read a ghost story. But again, I'm using my glasses. We're in my normal podcast studio. So here we go, you guys. And I want to let you know that this book is free. This book in particular is copyright free. So we're going to clear that up for the Internet Police. It's copyright free via Project Gutenberg. Okay? So these have all been translated and everything else by people. So here we go. The Shadows on the Wall by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. From the Wind in the Rosebush by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. Copyright by Harper Brothers. Copyright free. Henry had words with Edward in the study the night before Edward died, said Carolyn Glenn. Okay, I'll ask to add in there. I'm going to do my best as I'm reading through these things, because a lot of this isn't up to the terms that we have nowadays. So just to let you guys know that I'm going to do my best to work around that. If I miss one, don't go after me with the Internet Police. I'm doing the best I can, trying to get through the words on this stuff, okay? All right. She spoke not with acrimony, but with grave severity. Okay. Rebecca Ann Glynn gasped by way of assent. She sat in a wide flounce of black silk in the corner of the sofa, and rolled terrified eyes from her sister Caroline to her sister, Mrs. Stephen Brigham, who had been Emma Glynn, the one beauty of the family. The latter was beautiful still, With a large, splendid, full-blown beauty, she filled the great rocking chair with her superb bulk of femininity and swayed gently back and forth, her black silks whispering and her black frills fluttering. Even the shock of death, for her brother Edward lay unalived in the house, could not disturb her outward serenity or demeanor. But even her expression of masterly placidity changed before her sister Caroline's announcement and her sister Rebecca Ann's gasp of terror and distress in response. I think Henry might have controlled his temper. When poor Edward was so near his end, she said with an asperity which disturbed slightly the roseate curves of her beautiful mouth. Of course he didn't know, murmured Rebecca Ann in a faint tone. Of course he did not know it, said Caroline quickly. She turned on her sister with a strange, sharp look of suspicion. Then she shrank as if from the other's possible answer. Rebecca gasped again. The married sister, Mrs. Emma Brigham, was now sitting up straight in her chair. She had ceased rocking and was eyeing them both intently with a sudden accentuation of family likeness in her face. What do you mean? Said she impartially to them both. Then she, too, seemed to shrink before a possible answer. She even laughed an evasive sort of laugh. Nobody means anything, said Caroline firmly. She rose and crossed the room toward the door with grim decisiveness. Where are you going? Asked Mrs. Brigham. I've something to see to, replied Caroline, and the others at once knew by her tone that she had some solemn and sad duty to perform in the chamber of death. Oh, said Mrs. Brigham. After the door had closed behind Caroline, she turned to Rebecca. Did Henry have many words with him? She asked. They were talking very loud, replied Rebecca evasively. Mrs. Brigham looked at her. She had not resumed rocking. She still sat up straight, with a slight knitting of intensity on her fair forehead, between the pretty rippling curves of her auburn hair. Did you ever hear anything? She asked in a low voice, with a glance towards the door. I was just across the hall in the south parlor, and that door was open and this door ajar, replied Rebecca with a slight flush. Then you must have. I couldn't help it. Everything? Most of it. What was it? Ah, the old story. I suppose Henry was mad, as he always was, because Edward was living on here for nothing, when he had wasted all the money father left him. Rebecca nodded with a fearful glance at the door. When Emma spoke again, her voice was still more hushed. I know how he felt, she said. It must have looked to him as if Edward was living at his expense. But he wasn't. No, he wasn't. And Edward had a right here according to the terms of father's will, and Henry ought to have remembered it. Yes, he ought to have. But did he say hard things? Pretty hard from what I heard. What? I heard him tell Edward that he had no business here at all, and he thought he had better go away. What did Edward say? That he would stay here as long as he lived, and afterward, too, if he was a mind to. And he would like to see Henry get him out. And then, what? Then he laughed. What did Henry say? I didn't hear him say anything, but what? I saw him when he came out of his room. He looked mad? You've seen him when he looked so. Emma nodded. The expression of horror on her face had deepened. Do you remember that time he unalived the cat because she had scratched him? Yes, don't. Then Caroline re-entered the room. She went up to the stove, in which a wood fire was burning. It was a cold, gloomy day of fall, and she warmed her hands, which were reddened from the recent washing in cold water. Mrs. Brigham looked at her and hesitated. She glanced at the door, which was still ajar. It did not easily shut, being still swollen with the damp weather of the summer. She rose and pushed it together with a sharp thud, which jarred at the house. Rebecca started painfully with a half-exclamation. Caroline looked at her disapprovingly. It is time you controlled your nerves, Rebecca, she said. Mrs. Brigham returned to the closed door, said imperiously that it ought to be fixed. It shut so hard. It will shrink enough after we've had a fire for a few days, replied Caroline. I think Henry ought to be ashamed of himself for talking as he did to Edward, said Mrs. Brigham abruptly, but in an almost inaudible voice. Hush, said Caroline, with a glance of actual fear at the closed door. Nobody can hear with the door shut. I say again, I think Henry ought to be ashamed of himself. I shouldn't think he'd ever get over it, having words with poor Edward the very night before he died. Edward was enough sight, better Edward was enough sight, better disposition than Henry, with all his faults. I never heard him speak a cross word, unless he spoke cross to Henry. That last night. I don't know, but he did, from what Rebecca overheard. Not so much cross as sort of soft and sweet and aggravating, sniffed Rebecca. What do you really think ailed Edward? Asked Emma, in hardly more than a whisper. She did not look at her sister. I know you said that he had terrible pains in his stomach, and had spasms. But what do you think made him have them? Henry called it gastric trouble. You know, Edward had always had stomach problems himself. Mrs. Brigham hesitated a moment. Was there any talk of an examination? She said. Then Caroline turned on her fiercely. No, she said in a terrible voice. No. The three sisters' souls seemed to meet on one common ground of terrified understanding through their eyes. The old-fashioned latch of the door was heard to rattle, and with a push from without, made the door shake ineffectively. It's Henry, said Rebecca, rather than whispered. Mrs. Brigham settled herself after a noiseless rush across the floor into her rocking chair again, and was swaying back and forth with her head comfortably leaning back when the door at last yielded, and Henry Glynn entered. He cast a covertly sharp, comprehensive glance at Mrs. Brigham with her elaborate calm, at Rebecca, quietly huddled in the corner of the sofa with her handkerchief to her face, and only one small uncovered reddened ear, as attentive as a dog's, and at Caroline sitting with a strained composure in her armchair by the stove. She met his eyes quite firmly with a look of inscrutable fear and defiance of the fear and of him. Henry Glynn looked more like his sister than the others. Both had the same hard delicacy of form and aquilinity of feature. They confronted each other with the pitiless immovability of two statues in whose marble lineaments emotions were fixed for all eternity. Then Henry Glynn smiled, and the smile transformed his face. He looked suddenly years younger, and an almost boyish recklessness appeared in his face. He flung himself into a chair with a gesture which was bewildering from its incongruity with his general appearance. He leaned his head back, flung one leg over the other, and looked laughingly at Mrs. Brigham. I declare, Emma, you grow younger every year, he said. She flushed a little, and her placid mouth widened at the corners. She was susceptible to praise. Our thoughts today ought to belong to the one of us who will never grow older, said Caroline in a hard voice. Henry looked at her, still smiling. Of course, we none of us forget that, said he, in a deep, gentle voice. But we have to speak to the living, Caroline, and I have not seen Emma for a long time. And the living are as dear as the dead. Not to me, said Caroline. She rose and went abruptly out of the room again. Rebecca also rose and hurried after her, sobbing loudly. Henry looked slowly after them. Caroline is completely unstrung, said he. Mrs. Brigham rocked. A confidence in him, inspired by his manner, was stealing over her. Out of that confidence, she spoke quite easily and naturally. His death was very sudden, she said. Henry's eyelids quivered slightly, but his gaze was unswerving. Yes, said he. It was very sudden. He was sick only a few hours. What did you call it? Gastric? You did not think of an examination? There was no need. I'm perfectly certain as to the cause of the death. Suddenly, Mrs. Brigham felt a creep, as of some live horror over her very soul. Her flesh prickled with cold before an inflection of his voice. She rose, tottering on weak knees. Where are you going? Asked Henry in a strange, breathless voice. Mrs. Brigham said something incoherent about some sewing which she had to do, some black for the funeral, and was out of the room. She went up to the front chamber which she occupied. Caroline was there. She went close to her and took her hands, and the two sisters looked at each other. Don't speak, don't. I won't have it, said Caroline, finally in an awful whisper. I won't, replied Emma. That afternoon, the three sisters were in the study. Mrs. Brigham was hemming some black material. At last she laid her work on her lap. It's no use. I can't see to sew another stitch until we have a light, she said. Caroline, who was writing some letters at the table, turned to Rebecca in her usual place on the sofa. Rebecca, you'd better get a lamp, she said. Rebecca started up. Even in the dusk, her face showed her agitation. "It doesn't seem to me that we need a lamp quite yet," she said in a piteous, pleading voice like a child's. "Yes, we do," returned Mrs. Brigham. "I can't see to sew another stitch." Rebecca rose and left the room. Presently she entered with a lamp. She set it on the table, an old-fashioned card table, which was placed against the opposite wall from the window. That opposite wall was taken up with 3 doors. The one small space was occupied by the table. "What have you put that lamp over there for?" asked Mrs. Brigham, with more impatience than her voice usually revealed. "Why don't you set it in the hall and have done with it? Neither Caroline nor I can see if it's on that table." "I thought perhaps you would move," replied Rebecca. "If I do move, we can't both sit at that table. Caroline has her paper all spread around her. Why don't you set the lamp on the study table in the middle of the room? Then we can both see." Rebecca hesitated. Her face was very pale. She looked with an appeal that was fairly agonizing at her sister Caroline. "Why don't you put the lamp on this table, as she says?" asked Caroline, almost fiercely. "Why do you act so, Rebecca?" Rebecca took the lamp and set it on the table in the middle of the room, without another word. Then she seated herself on the sofa and placed a hand over her eyes, as if to shade them, and remained so. "Does the light hurt your eyes? And is that the reason why you didn't want the lamp?" asked Mrs. Brigham kindly. "I always like to sit in the dark," replied Rebecca chokingly. Then she snatched her handkerchief hastily from her pocket and began to weep. Caroline continued to write, Mrs. Brigham to sew. Suddenly Mrs. Brigham, as she sewed, glanced at the opposite wall. The glance became a steady stare. She looked intently, her work suspended in her hands. Then she looked away and again took a few more stitches. Then she looked again and again turned to her task. At last she laid her work in her lap and stared concentratingly on that wall. She looked from the wall around the room, taking note of the various objects. Then she turned to her sisters. "What is that?" she said. "What?" asked Caroline harshly. "The strange shadow on the wall," replied Mrs. Brigham. Rebecca sat with her face hidden. Caroline dipped her pen in the inkstand. "Why don't you turn around and look?" asked Mrs. Brigham in a wondering and somewhat aggrieved way. "I'm in a hurry to finish this letter," replied Caroline shortly. Mrs. Brigham rose, her work slipping to the floor, and began walking round the room, moving various articles of furniture, with her eyes on the shadow. Then suddenly she shrieked out, "Look at this awful shadow! What is it, Caroline? Look, 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 Rebecca! Look, what is it?" All Mrs. Brigham's triumphant publicity was gone. Her handsome face was livid with horror. She stood stiffly pointing at the shadow. Then, after a shuddering glance at the wall, Rebecca burst out in a wild wail. "Oh, Caroline, there it is again! There it is again!" "Caroline Glynn, you look," said Mrs. Brigham. "Look, what is that dreadful shadow?" Caroline rose, turned and stood confronting the wall. "How should I know?" she said. "It has been there every night since he died," cried Rebecca. "Every night?" "Yes. He died Thursday, and this is Saturday. That makes 3 nights," said Caroline rigidly. She stood as if holding her calm with a vice of concentrated will. It looks like," stammered Mrs. Brigham in a tone of intense horror. "I know what it looks like well enough," said Caroline. "I've got eyes in my head." "It looks like Edward," burst out Rebecca in a sort of frenzy of fear. "Only—" "Yes, it does," assented Mrs. Brigham, whose horror-stricken tone matched her sister's. "Only, oh, it is awful. What is it, Caroline?" "I ask you again. How should I know?" replied Caroline. "I see it there like you. How should I know any more than you?" "It must be something in the room," said Mrs. Brigham, staring wildly around. "We moved everything in the room the first night it came," said Rebecca. "It is not anything in this room." Caroline turned upon her with a sort of fury. "Of course it is something in the room," she said. "How you act! What do you mean talking so? Of course it is something in the room." "Of course it is," agreed Mrs. Brigham, looking at Caroline suspiciously. "It must be something in the room." "It isn't anything in the room," repeated Rebecca with obstinate horror. The door opened suddenly, and Henry Glynn entered. He began to speak, then his eyes followed the direction of the others. He stood staring at the shadow on the wall. "What is that?" he demanded in a strange voice. "It must be due to something in the room." "Excuse me," Mrs. Brigham said faintly. Henry Glynn stood and stared a moment longer. His face showed a gamut of emotions: horror, conviction, then furious. Then he was furious. Suddenly he began hastening hither and thither about the room. He moved the furniture with fierce jerks, turning ever to see the effect upon the shadow on the wall. Not a line of its terrible outlines wavered. It must be something in the room, he declared, in a voice which seemed to snap like a lash. His face changed. The inmost secrecy of his nature seemed evident upon his face, until one almost lost sight of his lineaments. Rebecca stood close to her sofa, regarding him with woeful, fascinated eyes. Mrs. Brigham clutched Caroline's hand. They both stood in a corner out of his way. For a few moments he raged about the room like a caged wild animal. He moved every piece of furniture. When the moving of a piece did not affect the shadow, he flung it to the floor. Then suddenly he desisted. He laughed. "What an absurdity," he said. "Such a to-do about a shadow." "That's so," assented Mrs. Brigham in a scared voice, which she tried to make natural. As she spoke, she lifted the chair near her. "I think you have broken the chair that Edward was fond of," said Caroline. Terror and wrath were here struggling for expression on her face. Her mouth was set, her eyes shrinking. Henry lifted the chair with a show of anxiety. "Just as good as ever." "Where are you going?" "The dog's in here. Hang on." "Where are you?" "Give me a second here. I don't know where she's at." "Hang on, you guys. I know she's here." "Where are you?" "I don't want you getting any of my stuff." "Are you behind me?" "Oh, no, you're over there. Okay." "She's a black dog. It's dark in here. Sorry." "Okay. All right, you're good. You're good. Just wondering where you were. What? You want to meet everybody? Come on up. Come on. Come on and meet everybody. There you guys go over there on the other two apps. There she is. No one hardly sees her. TikTok, I'll try and get her over here for you, but she doesn't like the camera. She doesn't know she's on right now. So she's on over at... If you guys want to see the replay, I'll tell you where to see the replay afterwards. But she just came up. It's not like her to do that. Okay, let's get back to here. Terror and wrath were struggling for expression. Let me get this going. Terror and wrath were struggling for expression on her face. Her mouth was set, her eyes shrinking. Henry lifted the chair with a show of anxiety. "Ah, just as good as ever," he said pleasantly. He laughed again, looking at his sisters. "Did I scare you?" he said. I should think you might be used to me by this time. You know, my way of wanting to leap into the bottom of a mystery. And that shadow does look queer. And I thought if there was any way of accounting for it, I would like to without any delay." "You don't seem to have succeeded," remarked Caroline dryly, but with a slight glance at the wall. Henry's eyes followed hers, and he quivered perceptibly. "Oh, there is no accounting for shadows," he said. And he laughed again. "A man is a fool to try and account for shadows." Then the slipper bell rang, and they all left the room, but Henry kept his back to the wall, as did, indeed, the others. Henry led the way with an alert motion, like a boy. Rebecca brought up the rear. She could scarcely walk. Her knees trembled so badly. "I can't sit in that room again this evening," she whispered to Caroline after supper. "Very well. We'll sit in the south room," replied Caroline. "I think we will sit in the south parlor," she said aloud. "It isn't as damp as the study, and I have a cold." So they all sat in the south room with their sewing. Henry read the newspaper, his chair drawn close to the lamp on the table. About 9 o'clock he rose abruptly and crossed the hall to the study. The three sisters looked at one another. Mrs. Brigham rose, folded her rustling skirts compactly round her, and began tiptoeing towards the door. "What are you going to do?" inquired Rebecca. "I'm going to see what he is about," replied Mrs. Brigham cautiously. As she spoke, she pointed to the study door across the hall. It was ajar. Henry had striven to pull it together behind him, but it had somehow swollen beyond the limit with curious speed. It was still ajar, and a streak of light showed from the top to bottom. Mrs. Brigham folded her skirts so tightly that her bulk, with its swelling curves, was revealed in a black silk sheath, and she went with a slow toddle across the hall to the study door. She stood there, her eye at the crack. In the south room, Rebecca stopped sewing and sat watching with dilated eyes. Dilated eyes. Caroline sewed steadily. What Mrs. Brigham, standing at the crack in the study door, saw was this. Henry Glynn, evidently reasoning that the source of the strange shadow must be between the table on which the lamp stood and the wall, was making systematic passes and thrusts with an old sword, which had belonged to his father, all over and through the intervening space. Not an inch was left unpierced. He seemed to have divided the space into mathematical sections. He brandished the sword with a sort of cold fury and calculation. The blade gave out flashes of light. The shadow remained unmoved. Mrs. Brigham, watching, felt herself cold with horror. Finally, Henry ceased and stood with the sword in his hand, and raised it as if to strike, surveying the shadow on the wall threateningly. Mrs. Brigham toddled back across the hall and shut the south room door behind her before she related what she had seen. He looked like a demon, she said again. Have you got any of that old wine in the house, Caroline? I don't feel as if I could stand much more of this. Yes, there's plenty, said Caroline. You can have some when you go to bed. I think we had all better take some, said Mrs. Brigham. Oh, Caroline, what? Don't ask, don't speak, said Caroline. No, I'm not going to, replied Mrs. Brigham. But soon the three sisters went to their chambers, and the south parlor was deserted. Caroline called to Henry in the study to put out the light before he came upstairs. They had been gone about an hour when he came into the room, bringing the lamp which had stood in the study. He set it on the table and waited a few minutes, pacing up and down. His face was terrible. His fair complexion showed livid, and his blue eyes seemed dark blanks of awful reflections. Then he took up the lamp and returned it to the library. He set the lamp on the center table, and the shadow sprang out on the wall. Again, he studied the furniture and moved it about, but deliberately, with none of his former frenzy. Nothing affected that shadow. Then he returned to the south room with the lamp and again waited. Again he returned to the study and placed the lamp on the table, and the shadow sprang out upon the wall. It was midnight before he went upstairs. Mrs. Brigham and the other sisters, who could not sleep, heard him. The next day was the funeral. That evening the family sat in the south room, some relatives who were with them. Nobody entered the study until Henry carried a lamp in there after the others had retired for the night. He saw again the shadow on the wall, leap to an awful life before the light. The next morning at breakfast, Henry Glynn announced that he had to go to the city for 3 days. The sisters looked at him with surprise. He very seldom left home, and just now his practice had been neglected on account of Edward's death. How can you leave your patients now? Asked Mrs. Brigham, wonderingly. I don't know how to, but there is no other way, replied Henry easily. I have had a telegram from Dr. Mitford. Consultation? Inquired Mrs. Brigham. I have business, replied Henry. Dr. Mitford was an old classmate of his who lived in a neighboring city and who occasionally called upon him in the case of a consultation. After he had gone, Mrs. Brigham said to Caroline, after all, Henry had not said that he was going to consult with the doctor, and she thought it very strange. Everything is very strange, said Rebecca with a shudder. What do you mean? Inquired Caroline. Nothing, replied Rebecca. Nobody entered that study that day, nor the next, or the third day. On the third day, Henry was expected home, but he did not arrive, and the last train from the city had come. I call it pretty queer work, said Mrs. Brigham. The idea of a doctor leaving his patients at such a time as this, and the idea of a consultation lasting 3 days. There's no sense in it, and now he has not come home. I don't understand it for my part. I don't either, said Rebecca. They were all in the south parlor. There was no light in the study. The door was ajar. Presently Mrs. Brigham rose. She could not have told why. Something seemed to impel her. Some will outside of her own. She went out of the room, again wrapping her rustling skirts around her, that she might pass noiselessly, and began pushing at the swollen door of the study. She has not got any lamp, said Rebecca in a shaking voice. Caroline, who was writing letters, rose again, took the only remaining lamp in the room, and followed her sister. Rebecca had risen, but she stood trembling, not venturing to follow. The doorbell rang, but the others didn't hear it. It was on the south door on the other side of the house, in the study. Rebecca, after hesitating until the bell rang the second time, went to the door She remembered that the servant was out. Caroline and her sister Emma entered the study. Caroline set the lamp on the table. They looked at the wall, and there were two shadows. The sisters stood clutching each other, staring at the awful things on the wall. Then Rebecca came in, staggering, with a telegram in her hand. "Here is a telegram," she gasped. "Henry has died." I think that's the end of that book. That's the end of that section. Very interesting. Didn't think it was going to end there. Okay. This next story is called The Messenger by Robert W. Chambers. So that makes sense. The shadows they saw on the wall turned out to be both brothers. Spooky. All right, the next story is called The Messenger by Robert W. Chambers. Hi, Pamela. How goes it? Good to see you. Looking to get more consistent with these shows, too, for California Haunts Radio. That's a good one, huh? Okay, so the next one is... Where is it? The Messenger? Okay. Okay. Next story is The Messenger by Robert W. Chambers. So we got a poem here, so let's see if I can if I can do this. Let me pull this down a little bit towards my mouth. Hang on, let me make an adjustment. There you are. Okay. So here we go. Little gray messenger, robe like painted death. Your robe is dust. Whom do you speak? Who do you seek among lilies and closed buds at dusk? Among lilies and closed buds at dusk. Whom do you seek, little gray messenger, robed in the awful I can't say the word. Panoply of, okay, of painted death. Okay, robed in the awful panoply of painted death. RWC. This book is from The Mystery of Choice by Robert W. Chambers, published 1897 by D. Appleton and Company. Copyright by Robert Chambers. Okay, all wise. Hast thou seen all there is to see with thy two eyes? Dost thou know all there is to know? And so, omniscient, darest thou still to say that brother lies? RWC. So here we go. Part 1. The bullet entered here, said Max Fortin, as he placed his middle finger over a smooth hole exactly in the center of the forehead. I sat down upon a mound of dry seaweed and unslung my fowling piece. The little chemist cautiously felt the edges of the shot hole, first with his middle finger, then with his thumb. Remember, guys, okay, no internet police, I'm just reading a book, okay? Let me see the skull again, said I. Max Fortin picked it up from the sod. It's like all the others, he repeated, wiping his glasses on his handkerchief. I thought you might care to see one of the skulls. So I brought this over from the gravel pit. The men from Banalek are digging yet. They ought to stop. How many skulls are there altogether? I inquired. They found 38 skulls. There are 39 noted in the list. They lie piled up in the gravel pit on the edge of Labihan's wheat field. The men are at work yet. Labihan is going to stop them. Let's go over, said I, and I picked up my gun and started across the cliffs. Porton on one side, Momi on the other. Who has the list? I asked, lighting my pipe. You say there's a list? The list was found rolled up in a brass cylinder, said the chemist. He added, you should not smoke here. You know that if a single spark drifted into the weeds. Ah, but I have a cover on my pipe, said I, smiling. Fortin watched me as I closed the pepper box arrangement over the glowing bowl of the pipe. Then he continued. The list was made out on thick yellow paper. The brass tube has preserved it. It's as fresh today as it was in 1760. You'll see it. Is that the date? The list is dated April 1760. The Brigadier Durand has it. It is not written in French. Thank God, guys. Not written in French? I exclaimed. No, replied Fortin solemnly. It's written in Britain. But, I protested, the Breton language was never written or printed in 1760. Except by priests, said the chemist. I've heard about one priest who ever wrote the Breton language, I began. Fortin stole a glance at my face. You mean the black priest, he asked. I nodded. Fortin opened his mouth to speak again. hesitated, and finally shut his teeth obstinately over the wheat stem that he was chewing. And the black priest? I suggested, encouragingly. But I knew it was useless, for it is easier to move the stars from their courses than to make an obstinate Briton talk. We walked on for a minute or two in silence. Where's the Brigadier Durand? I asked, motioning Momi to come out of the wheat, which he was trampling as though it were heather. As I spoke, we came in sight of the farther edges of the wheat field, and the dark, wet mass of cliffs beyond. Durand is down there. You can see him. He stands just behind the Mare of St. Gildas. I see, said I, and we struck straight down, following a sun-baked cattle path across the heather. When we reached the edge of the wheat field, Lebihan, the Mayor of St. Gildas, called to me, and I tucked my gun under my arm and skirted the wheat to where he stood. 38 skulls, he said in his thin, high-pitched voice. There is but one more, and I am opposed to further search. I suppose Fortin told you. I shook hands with him and returned the salute of the Brigadier Durand. I am opposed to further search, repeated Lebihan nervously, picking at the massive silver buttons which covered the front of his vest, his velvet and broadcloth jacket, like a breastplate of scale armor. Durand pursed up his lips, twisted his tremendous mustache, and hooked his thumbs in his saber belt. As for me, he said, I am in favor of further search. Further search for what? For the 39th skull, I asked. Lebihan nodded. Durand frowned at the sunlit sea, rocking like a bowl of molten gold from the cliffs to the horizon. I followed his eyes. On the dark, glistening cliffs, silhouetted against the glare of the sea, sat a cormorant, black and motionless, its horrible head raised toward heaven. Where is that list, Durand? I asked. The gendarme rummaged in his dispatch pouch and produced a brass cylinder about a foot long. Very gravely he unscrewed the head and dumped out the scroll of thick yellow paper, closely covered, with writing on both sides. At a nod from Lebihan, he handed me the scroll, but I could make nothing out of the coarse writing, now faded to a dull brown. Come, Lebihan, I said impatiently. Translate it, won't you? You and Max Fortin make a lot of mystery out of nothing, it seems. Lebihan went to the edge of the pit where the 3 Banalek men were digging, gave an order or two in Britain, and turned to me. As I came to the edge of the pit, the Banalek men were removing a square piece of sailcloth from what appeared to be a pile of cobblestones. Look, said Lebihan shrilly. I looked. The pile below was a heap of skulls. After a moment, I clambered down the gravel sides of the pit and walked over to the men of Banalek. They saluted me gravely, leaning on their picks and shovels and wiping their sweating faces with sunburned hands. How many, said I in Britain. 38, they replied. I glanced around. Beyond the heap of skulls lay 2 piles of human bones. Besides these was a mound of broken, rusted bits of iron and steel. Looking closer, I saw that this mound was composed of rusty bayonets, saber blades, scythe blades, with here and there a tarnished buckle attached to a bit of leather, hard as iron. I picked up a couple of buttons and a belt plate. The buttons bore the royal arms of England. The belt plate was emblazoned with the English arms and also with the number 27. I have heard my grandfather speak of the terrible English regiment, the 27th Foot, which landed and stormed the fort up there, said one of the Banalek men. Oh, said I, then these are the bones of English soldiers? Yes, said the man of Banalek. Lebihan was calling to me from the edge of the pit above, and I handed the belt plate and buttons to the men and climbed the side of the excavation. Well, said I, trying to prevent Mummy from leaping up and licking my face as I emerged from the pit. Ah, it's a dog. I suppose you know what these bones are. What are you going to do with them? There was a man, said Lebihan angrily, an Englishman, who passed here in a dog cart on his way to Quimper about an hour ago. And what do you suppose he wished to do? Buy the relics, I asked, smiling. Exactly, the pig, piped the mayor of St. Gildas. Jean-Marie Trigon, who found the bones, was standing there where Max Fortin stands. And do you know what he answered? He spat upon the ground and said, "Pig of an Englishman, do you take me for a desecrator of graves?" I knew Tregunc, a sober blue-eyed Briton who lived from one year's end to the other without being able to afford a single bit of meat for a meal. How much did the Englishman offer Tregunc? I asked. 200 francs for the skulls alone. I thought of the relic hunters and the relic buyers on the battlefield of our Civil War. 1760 is long ago, I said. Respect for the dead can never die, said Fortin. And the English soldiers came here to kill your fathers and burn your homes, I continued. They were murderers and thieves. But they are dead, said Tregunc, coming up from the beach below. His long sea rake balanced on his dripping jersey. How much do you earn every year, Jean-Marie? I asked, turning to shake the hands with him. 220 francs, monsieur. $45 a year, I said. Bah, you are worth more, Jean. Will you take care of my garden for me? My wife wished me to ask you. I think it would be worth 100 francs a month, to you and to me. Come on, Le Bihan. Come along. Fortin and you, Durand. I want somebody to translate that list into French for me. Tregunc stood gazing at me. His blue eyes dilated. You may begin at once, I said, smiling, if the salary suits you. It suits, said Tregunc, fumbling for his pipe in a silly way that annoyed Le Bihan. Then go and begin your work, cried the mayor impatiently. And Tregunc started across the moors towards St. Gildas, taking off his velvet ribbon cap to me and gripping his sea rake very hard. You offer him more than my salary, said the mayor, after a moment of contemplation. Pooh, said I. What do you do for your salary except play dominoes with Max Fortin at the Groying? Le Bihan turned red, but Durand rattled his saber and winked at Max Fortin. And I slipped my arm through the arm of the sulky magistrate, laughing. There's a shady spot under the cliff, I said. Come on, Le Bihan, and read me what's in that scroll. In a few moments we reached the shadow of the cliff, and I threw myself upon the turf, chin on hand, to listen. The gendarme Durand, who also sat down, twisting his moustache into needle-like points. Fortin leaned against the cliff, polishing his glasses and examining us with vague, nearsighted eyes. And Le Bihan, the mayor, planted himself in our midst, rolling up the scroll and tucking it under his arm. First of all, he began, in a shrill voice, I'm going to light my pipe. And while lighting it, I shall tell you what I have heard about the attack on the fort yonder. My father told me. His father told him. He jerked. He jerked his head in the direction of the ruined fort. A small square stone structure on the sea cliff, now nothing but crumbling walls. Then he slowly produced a tobacco pouch, a bit of flint and tinder, and a long stem pipe, fitted with a microscopic bowl of baked clay. To fill such a pipe requires 10 minutes close attention. To smoke it to a finish takes but 4 puffs. It is very Britain, this Britain pipe. It is the crystallization of everything Britain. Go on, said I, lighting a cigarette. The fort, said the mayor, was built by Louis the 18th, XIV, you guys know better than I do, and was dismantled twice by the English. Louis XV restored it. I told you guys I couldn't read Roman numerals. Louis XV restored it in 1730. In 1760, it was carried by assault by the English. They came across from the island of Groix, 3 shiploads, and they stormed the fort and sacked St. Julien yonder. And they started to burn St. Gildas. You can see the marks of their bullets on my house yet. But the men of Branilic and the men of Lorient fell upon them with pike, and scythe and blunderbuss, and those who did not run away lie there below in the gravel pit now, 38 of them. And the 39th skull, I asked, finishing my cigarette. The mayor had succeeded in filling his pipe, and now he began to put his tobacco pouch away. The 39th skull, he mumbled, holding the pipe stem between his defective teeth. The 39th skull is no business of mine. I have told the Banalick men to cease digging. But who is the missing skull? I persisted. The mayor was busy trying to strike a spark to his tinder. Presently he set it aglow, applied it to his pipe, took the prescribed 4 puffs, knocked the ashes out of the bowl, and gravely replaced the pipe in his pocket. The missing scroll, he asked? Yes, I said impatiently. The mayor slowly unrolled the scroll and began to read, translating the Breton into French. And this is what he read. On the cliffs of St. Gildas, April 13th, 1760. On this day, by order of the Count of Soistic, General-in-Chief of the Breton forces now lying in Kersalik Forest, the bodies of 38 English soldiers of the 27th, 50th, and 72nd Regiments afoot were buried in this spot, together with their arms and equipments. The mayor paused and glanced at me reflectively. Go on, Le Bihan, I said. With them, continued the mayor, turning the scroll and reading on the other side, was buried the body of that vile traitor who betrayed the fort to the English. The manner of his death was as follows. By order of the most noble Count of Soistic, the traitor was first branded upon the forehead with the brand of an arrowhead. The iron burned through the flesh and was pressed heavily so that the brand should even burn into the bone of the skull. The traitor was then led out and bidden to kneel. He admitted having guided the English from the island of Groix. Although a priest and a Frenchman, he had violated his priestly office to aid him in discovering the password to the fort. This password he extorted during confession from a young Breton girl who was in the habit of rowing across from the island of Groix to visit her husband in the fort. When the fort fell, this young girl, by the death of her husband, sought the Count of Soistic and told him how the priest had forced her to confess to him all she knew about the fort. The priest was arrested at St. Gildas as he was about to cross the river to Lorient. When he arrested, he cursed the girl, Marie Trevec. What? I exclaimed. Marie Trevec? Marie Trevec, repeated Le Bihan. The priest cursed Marie Trevec and all her family and descendants. He was shot as he knelt, having a mask of leather over his face, because the Bretons who composed the squad of execution refused to fire at the priest unless his face was concealed. The priest was l'Abbé Sorgue, commonly known as the Black Priest, on account of his dark face and swarthy eyebrows. He was buried with a stake through his heart. Le Bihan paused, hesitated, looked at me, and handed the manuscript back to Durand. The gendarme took it and slipped it into the brass cylinder. So, said I, the 39th skull is the skull of the Black Priest. Yes, said Fortin. I hope they won't find it. I have forbidden them to proceed, said the mayor. You heard me, Max Fortin. I rose and picked up my gun. Moment came and pushed his head into my hand. That's a fine dog, observed Durand, also rising. Why don't you wish to find the skull? I asked Le Bihan. I would be curious to see whether the arrow brand really burned into that bone. There is something in that scroll that I didn't read to you, said the mayor grimly. Do you wish to know what it is? Of course, I replied. Give me the scroll again, Durand, he said. Then, where'd it go? Okay. Then he read from the bottom. I, Abbé Sorok, forced to write the above by my executioners, have written it in my own blood, and with it I leave my curse. My curse on St. Gildas, on Marie Trevec, and on her descendants. I will come back to St. Gildas when my remains are disturbed. Woe to that Englishman whom my branded skull shall touch. What rot, I said. Do you believe it was really written in his own blood? I'm going to test it, said Fortin, at the request of Monsieur le Maire. I'm not anxious for the job, however. It's pitch black in here, you guys, and she's moving around, and she's pitch black. See, said Le Bihan, holding out the scroll to me. It is signed, l'Abbé Sorgue. I hope I said it right. I glanced curiously over the paper. It must be the Black Priest, I said. He was the only man who wrote in the Breton language. This is a wonderfully interesting discovery, for now, at last, the mystery of the Black Priest's disappearance is cleared up. You will, of course, send this scroll to Paris, Le Bihan? No, said the mayor obstinately. It shall be buried in the pit below where the rest of that Black Priest lies. I looked at him and recognized that argument would be useless. But still, I said, and will be a loss to history, Monsieur le Bihan. All the worse for history, then, said the enlightened mayor of St. Gildas. We had sauntered back to the gravel pit while speaking. The men of Banalick were carrying the bones of the English soldiers toward the St. Gildas cemetery. On the cliffs to the east, where already a knot of white-coifed women stood in attitudes of prayer, and I saw the somber robe of a priest among the crosses of the little graveyard. They were thieves and assassins. They are dead now, muttered Max Fortin. Respect the dead, repeated the mayor of St. Gildas, looking after the Banalick men. It was written in that scroll that Marie Trevec of Great Island was cursed by the priest. She and her descendants, I said, touching the beacon on the arm. There was a Marie Trevec who married an Yves Trevec of St. Gildas. It is the same, the beacon said, looking at me obliquely. Oh, said I. Then they were ancestors of my wife. Do you fear the curse? Asked the beacon. What? I laughed. There was a case of the Purple Emperor, said Max Fortin timidly. Startled for a moment, I faced him, then shrugged my shoulders and kicked at a smooth bit of rock which lay near the edge of the pit, almost embedded in the gravel. Do you suppose the Purple Emperor drank himself crazy because he was descended from Marie Trevec? I asked contemptuously. Of course not, asked Max Fortin hastily. Of course not, piped the mayor. I only... Hello! What's that you're kicking? What, said I? I glanced down, at the same time involuntarily giving another kick. The smooth bit of rock dislodged itself and rolled out of the loosened gravel at my feet. The 39th skull, I exclaimed. By jingo, it's the noddle of the Black Priest. See, there is the arrowhead branded on the front. The mayor stepped back. Max Fortin also retreated. There was a pause, during which I looked at them, and they looked anywhere but at me. I don't like it, said the mayor at last, in a husky high voice. I don't like it at all. The scroll says he will come back to St. Gildas when his remains are disturbed. I don't like it. Monsieur Darrell? Bosh, said I. The poor wicked devil is where he can't get out. For heaven's sake, Lebihan, what is this stuff you're talking in the year of grace of 1896? The mayor gave me a look, and he says, Englishman. You are an Englishman, Monsieur Darrell, he announced. You know better. You know I'm an American. It's all the same, said the mayor of St. Gildas, obstinately. No, it isn't, I answered, much exasperated, and deliberately pushed the skull till it rolled into the bottom of the gravel pit below. Cover it up, said I. Bury the scroll with it, too, if you insist, but I think you ought to send it to Paris. Don't look so gloomy, Fortin, unless you believe in werewolves and ghosts. Hey, what the devils is the matter with you anyway? What are you staring at, Lebihan? Come, muttered the mayor in a low, tremulous voice. It's time we got out of this. Did you see, Fortin? I saw, whispered Max Fortin, pallid with fright. The two men were almost running across the sunny pasture now, and I hastened after them, demanding to know what the matter was. Matter, chattered the mayor, gasping with exasperation and terror. The skull is rolling uphill again, and he burst into a terrified gallop. Matt Fortin followed close behind. I watched them stampeding across the pasture, then turned toward the gravel pit, mystified, incredulous. The skull was lying on the edge of the pit, exactly where it had been before I pushed it over the edge. For a second I stared at it. A singular chilly feeling crept up my spinal column, and I turned and walked away, sweat starting from the root of every hair on my head. Before I had gone 20 paces, the absurdity of the whole thing struck me. I halted, hot with shame and annoyance, and retreated my steps. There lay the skull. I rolled a stone down instead of the skull. I muttered to myself. Then, with the butt of my gun, I pushed the skull over the edge of the pit and watched it roll to the bottom. And as it struck the bottom of the pit, Moby, my dog, suddenly whipped his tail between his legs, whimpered, and made off across the moor. Moby, I shouted, angry and astonished, but the dog only fled the faster, and I ceased calling from sheer surprise. What the mischief is the matter with that dog? I thought. He had never before played me such a trick. Mechanically, I glanced into the pit, but I could not see the skull. I looked down. The skull lay at my feet again, touching them. Good heavens, I stammered, and struck at it blindly with my gun stock. The ghastly thing flew into the air, whirling over and over, and rolled again down the sides of the pit to the bottom. Breathlessly, I stared at it. Then, confused and scarcely comprehending, I stepped back from the pit, still facing it. 1, 10, 20 paces. My eyes almost starting from my head, as though I expected to see the thing rolled up from the bottom of the pit under my very gaze. At last, I turned my back to the pit and strode out across the gorse-covered moor and toward my home. As I reached the road that winds from St. Gildas to St. Julien, I gave one hasty glance at the pit over my shoulder. The sun shone hot on the sod about the excavation. There was something white and bare and round on the turf at the edge of the pit. It might have been a stone. There were plenty of them lying about. Okay, part 2 of this story as we continue. Got another 10 minutes and then we'll call it a night. When I entered my garden, I saw Momi sprawled on the stone doorstep. He eyed me sideways and flopped his tail. Are you not mortified, you idiot dog? I'm sorry. I hope we don't get tagged on that one. I said, looking about the upper windows for Liz. Momi rolled over on his back and raised one deprecating forepaw as though to forward off calamity. Don't act as though I was in the habit of beating you to death, I said, disgusted. I had never in my life raised to whip to the brute. But you are a fool dog. I continued. No, you didn't come to be babied and whipped over. Liz can do that if she insists. But I am ashamed of you, and you can go off on your own. Mommy slunk off into the house, and I followed, mounting directly to my wife's bedroom. It was empty. Where has she gone? I said, looking hard at Mommy, who had followed me. Oh, I see you don't know. Don't pretend you do. Come off that lounge. Do you think Liz wants tan-colored hairs all over her lounge? I rang the bell for Catherine and Fine, but they didn't know where Madame had gone. So I went into my room, bathed, exchanged my somewhat grimy shooting clothes for a suit of warm, soft knickerbockers, and, after lingering some extra moments over my toilet, for I was particular, now that I had married Liz, I went down to the garden and took a chair out under the fig trees. Where can I be, or where can she be? I wondered. Mommy came sneaking out to be comforted, and I forgave him for Liz's sake, whereupon he frisked. You bounding cur, said I. Now what on earth started you off across the moor? If you ever do that again, I'll push you along with a charge of dust shot. And yet I had scarcely dared think about the ghastly hallucination of which I had been a victim. But now I faced it squarely, flushing a little with mortification at the thought of my hasty retreat from the gravel pit. To think, I said aloud, that those old women's tales of Max Fortin and Libyan should have actually made me see what didn't exist at all. I lost my nerve like a schoolboy in a dark bedroom. For I knew now that I had mistaken a round stone for a skull each time and had pushed a couple of big pebbles into the pit instead of the skull itself. By jingo, said I, I'm nervous. My liver must be in a delicate condition if I see such things when I'm awake. Liz will know what to give me. I felt mortified and irritated and sulky, and thought disgustedly of the beehive and Max Fortin. But after a while I ceased speculating, dismissed the mayor and chemist and the skull from my mind, and smoked pensively, watching the sun low dipping in the western ocean. As the twilight fell for a moment over the ocean and moorland, a wistful, restless happiness filled my heart, the happiness that all men know, all men who have loved. Slowly the purple mist crept out over the sea. The cliffs darkened, the forest was shrouded. Suddenly the sky above burned with the afterglow, and the world was all right again. Cloud after cloud caught the rose dye. The cliffs were tinted with it. Moor and pasture, heather and forest burned and pulsated with a gentle flush. I saw the gulls turning and tossing above the sandbar, their snowy wings tipped with pink. I saw the sea swallow shearing the surface of the still river, stained to the placid depths with warm reflections of the clouds. The twitter of drowsy hedge birds broke out in the stillness. A salmon rolled his shining side above the tidewater. The, in, the interminable monotone of the ocean intensified the silence. I sat motionless, holding my breath, as one who listens to the first low rumor of an organ. All at once, the pure whistle of a nightingale cut the silence, and the first moonbeam silvered the waste of mist-hung waters. I raised my head. Liz stood before me in the garden. When we had kissed each other, we linked arms and moved up and down the gravel walks, watching the moonbeams sparkle on the sandbar as the tide ebbed and ebbed. The broad beds of white pinks about us were a-tremble with hovering white moss. The October roses hung all abloom, perfuming the salt wine. Sweetheart, I said, where is Yvonne? Has she promised to spend Christmas with us? Yes, Dick. She drove me down from Plout this afternoon. She sent her love to you. I'm not jealous. What did you shoot? A hare and 4 partridges. They're in the gun room. I told Catherine not to touch them until you had seen them. Now, I suppose I knew that Liz could not be particularly enthusiastic over game or guns, but she pretended she was, and always scornfully denied that it was for my sake and not for the pure love of sport. So she dragged me off to inspect the rather meager game bag, and she paid me pretty compliments, and gave a little cry of delight and pity as I lifted the enormous hare out of the sack by his ears. He'll eat no more of our lettuce, I said, attempting to justify. Unhappy, little bunny, and what a beauty. Oh, Dick, you're a splendid shot, are you not? I evaded the question and hauled out a partridge. Poor little dead thing, Liz said in a whisper. It seems a pity, doesn't it? But then you are so clever. We'll have them broiled, I said guardedly. Tell Catherine. Catherine came in to take away the game, and presently fine Leocard, Liz's maid, announced dinner, and Liz tripped away to her bedroom. I stood an instant contemplating her blissfully thinking, my boy, you're the happiest fellow in the world. You're in love with your wife. I walked into the dining room, beamed at the plates, walked out again, met Triggle in the hallway, beamed on him, glanced into the kitchen, beamed at Catherine, and went upstairs, still beaming. Before I could knock at Liz's door, it opened, and Liz came hastily out. When she saw me, she gave a little cry of relief and nestled close to my breast. There's something peering in at my window, she said. What? I cried angrily. A man, I think, disguised as a priest, and he has a mask on. He must have climbed up by the bay tree. I was down the stairs and out the doors in no time. The moonlit garden was absolutely deserted. Trigolk came up, and together we searched the hedge and the shrubbery around the house, and out to the road. Jean-Marie, said I, at length, loose my bulldog. He knows you, and take your supper on the porch, where you can watch. My wife says the fellow is disguised as a priest and wears a mask. Trigolk showed his white teeth in a smile. He will not care to venture in here again, I think, Monsieur Darrow. I went back and found Liz seated quietly at the table. The soup is ready, dear, she said. Don't worry, it was only some foolish lout from Vanillick. No one in St. Gildas or St. Julian would do such a thing. I was way too much exasperated to reply at first, but Liz treated it as a stupid joke, and after a while I began to look at it in that light. Liz told me about Yvonne and reminded me of my promise to have Herbert Stewart down to meet her. You wicked diplomat, I protested. Herbert is in Paris and hard at work for the Salon. Don't you think he might spare a week to flirt with the prettiest girl in Finisterre? Inquired Liz innocently. Prettiest girl? Not much, I said. Who is then? Urged Liz. I laughed, a trifle sheepishly. I suppose you mean me, Dick, said Liz, coloring up. Now I bore you, don't I? Bore me? No, Dick. After coffee and cigarettes were served, I spoke about Trigolk, and Liz approved. Poor Jean. He will be glad, won't he? What a dear fellow you are. Nonsense, said I. We need a gardener. You said so yourself, Liz. But Liz leaned over and kissed me, and then bent down and hugged Mommy, who whistled through his nose in sentimental appreciation. I am a very happy woman, said Liz. Mommy was a very bad dog today, I observed. Poor Mommy, said Liz, smiling. When dinner was over, and Mommy lay snoring before the blaze, for the October nights are often chilly and finster, Liz curled up in the chimney corner with her embroidery, and gave me a swift glance from under her dropping lashes. You look like a schoolgirl, Liz, I said teasingly. I don't believe you are 16 yet. She pushed back her heavy burnished hair thoughtfully. Her wrist was as white as surf foam. Have we been married 4 years? I don't believe it, I said. She gave me another swift glance and touched the embroidery on her knee, smiling faintly. I see, said I, also smiling at the embroidered garment. Do you think it will fit? Fit, she repeated. She said. Then she laughed. And I persisted. Are you perfectly sure that you or we shall need it? Perfectly, said Liz. A delicate color touched her cheeks and neck. She held up the little garment, all fluffy with misty lace and wrought with quaint embroidery. It is very gorgeous, said I. Don't use your eyes too much, dearest. May I smoke a pipe? Of course, she said, selecting a skein of pale blue silk. For a while I sat and smoked in silence, watching her slender fingers among the tinted silks and thread of gold. Presently she spoke. What did you say your crest is, Dick? My crest? Oh, something or other rampant on something or other. Dick, dearest, don't be flippant. But I really forgot. It's an ordinary crest. Everybody in New York has them. No family should be without them. You are disagreeable, Dick. Send Josephine upstairs for my album. Are you going to put that crest on the whatever this is? I am, and my own crest too. I thought of the Purple Emperor and wondered a little. You didn't know I had one, did you? She smiled. What is it? I replied evasively. You shall see. Ring for Josephine. All right, I think that's a good place to stop tonight, and it's been an interesting book. The first part of the read was really, really good. Didn't see that ending coming. That was like a big slap. There we are at the end, right? Anyway, I want to thank you guys for tonight. We're going to continue this on Sunday. Let's see if I can mark this page. We're going to continue this next Sunday. And we're also going to be doing a field trip next week. Probably the Haunted Cemetery. Don't know where we're going to go yet. But that'll definitely probably be on Saturday next week to do the field trip. Saturday or Sunday. My producer wants to do a movie, so we have to work around that. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for coming and spending your Sunday evening with me. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their Sunday. I'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific to do psychic readings for you. But I love you all, and hope to see you tomorrow, okay? Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific for psychic readings. Have a great night, TikTok. Okay, and for the rest of you, same thing. I'll be doing psychic readings tomorrow. 3-card tarot card readings tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific. If you want to come on over and check out California Haunts on TikTok. And we're going to start getting more shows booked for California Haunts Radio. We're working on that right now. The show times are going to change. Instead of being at 5:30 p.m. Pacific or 5 p.m. Pacific, they are going to be now at 4 p.m. Pacific to give me time to do the other show at 6 p.m. So everything's going to be kind of changing around here, and we're going to be able to expand to where I'm going to be able to broadcast those shows directly to TikTok as well via Restream, and so I'm working on that right now. So there's a lot of things coming up, and there's going to be some field trips that involve everybody. Okay, it involves you guys, involves them, involves everybody. So I hope to see you guys, and in the meantime, love you all, miss you all, and hope you had a great night. Hope you had a great weekend. I will see you next week for sure. Bye.